Have you ever believed something simply because the world repeated it over and over, so firmly, so confidently, that you assumed it must be true, until reality itself proved you wrong? For years, a quiet insult has drifted around global conversations whenever the Philippines is mentioned in the context of English, an insult spoken casually, almost lazily. They don't speak real English, not shouted, not debated, just murmured with a kind of collective arrogance by columnists, travelers, businessmen, even academics. A comment so subtle and repeated so many times that the world accepted it without question. But that tiny comment carried a sting sharp enough to cut through pride, identity, and culture. And the story you're about to hear, yes, this one, is about the moment that illusion finally cracked. Because one of the most respected linguistics professors at Harvard University, yes, Harvard itself, the towering symbol of elite academia, once repeated this same insult with absolute confidence. Not jokingly, not maliciously, but with the calm assurance of a man who believed he was stating an intellectual fact. He said it with the tone of someone who thought he knew the world. And yet, months later, that same professor found himself standing in front of an auditorium in Manila, staring at a single sentence projected on a giant screen, his voice trembling as he spoke the words he once would have mocked. Filipinos speak English more fluently, more naturally, and with more authenticity than many native speakers I have taught. But before that moment, before the confession heard by hundreds, we need to rewind. Because every revelation begins in darkness. Every admission begins with denial. And this story begins far away from Harvard, far away from Manila. It starts in Geneva, Switzerland, inside a quiet conference room filled with the world's leading educators. And absolutely none of them expected what was coming. Professor Edwin Carmichael was known across universities in Europe and the US, a man in his late 50s, silver hair, sharp eyes, a respected scholar who had built his reputation on analyzing global English. People feared his critiques, admired his intelligence, envied his precision. To many, his definition of English was the definition of English. That night in Geneva, surrounded by soft lighting, coffee cups, and casual conversation, someone asked him a simple question. "Professor, what's your view on English in the Philippines? People say it's spoken everywhere there." He raised an eyebrow, leaned back in his chair, and with a faint, almost dismissive smile said, "Oh, it's widespread indeed. But let's be honest, it isn't authentic English. It's a kind of variation, a version, not the kind we teach at Harvard." A few people chuckled, others nodded with quiet agreement. Some didn't speak at all. And thousands of miles away, a nation that never heard these words continued living, unaware of the insult tossed across oceans with such ease. But words have a strange way of traveling. They echo, they find paths, they return to their source unexpectedly. Because a few months later, Professor Carmichael received an invitation. Come to the Philippines. Speak at a national conference on global education. He accepted without hesitation. To him, it was just another trip. Another lecture, another chance to be admired. He boarded the plane believing he was coming to teach. He didn't know that he was walking straight into the biggest intellectual awakening of his life. The first moment that shook him was small, almost insignificant. It happened in the back of a taxi on his first morning in Manila. The driver greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir. First time in the Philippines?" The professor nodded, barely paying attention, until he realized something was off. The man's English, not just grammatically correct, not just fluent, but alive, rolled out with clarity, humor, and a natural rhythm. He sounded like someone who had lived abroad, studied abroad, or traveled extensively. But he was just a taxi driver. The professor brushed it off. A coincidence, he reassured himself. One person doesn't represent a country. But then at the hotel reception, he witnessed something impossible to ignore. The staff shifted effortlessly between English, Tagalog, and Japanese. Not for show, not rehearsed, simply part of their normal day. Later at dinner, a young waiter explained the restaurant's specialties in English so polished it felt like he'd trained in a high-end international hotel chain. The professor felt a strange discomfort. Not acceptance, not belief, just a crack in certainty. That night, staring at Manila's golden skyline, he whispered to himself, "What if I'm mistaken?" He didn't know the larger storm was still coming. The next morning, with the conference still days away, he decided to explore the city. Notebook in hand, scholar's curiosity switched on. And what he encountered in the next few hours would peel away layers of arrogance he'd built over decades. His first stop was a quiet cafe in Intramuros. Inside were 3 college students, books spread out, laptops open, voices confident. He couldn't help listening in. They weren't gossiping, they weren't joking. They were analyzing political theory. In English, not basic English. Not casual English, but dense academic intellectual English. The kind he taught in graduate seminars at Harvard. One student even quoted a French philosopher, then translated the quote smoothly into English for her friends. Professor Carmichael lowered his pen. These weren't students speaking a foreign language. These were thinkers using English as their instrument, as naturally as breathing. Later, walking through the frenzy of Divisoria Market, he witnessed something even more startling. Vendors jumping between languages, English, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, while negotiating prices, explaining details, cracking jokes. Not stuttering, not hesitating, not guessing. One young woman spoke Japanese with a tourist, then turned and addressed Europeans in impressive English. Her transitions were effortless. He had spent decades teaching bilingualism in theory. Here it was unfolding before him in raw form. Practical, instinctive, masterful. This wasn't broken English. This was English reshaped, reimagined, re-energized by culture and necessity. English was not merely spoken here, it was lived. As evening fell, he wandered into a small chapel, drawn by the soft sound of singing. Inside, dozens of worshippers prayed in English. But this English was different. Gentle, emotional, sincere. Not memorized phrases, not foreign lines forced into their tongues. This was English transformed by faith, made intimate, made Filipino. He felt a lump form in his throat. A feeling he hadn't felt in years, humility. By the time he returned to his hotel that night, the professor could no longer close his notebook. His theories, his assumptions, his arrogance, they were all under attack. He whispered again, "Could I have been wrong all this time?" But the true breaking point was still ahead. The conference hall was grand, decorated with flags, filled with teachers, scholars, students, and journalists. This was supposed to be routine for him. Another lecture, another hall. Another audience ready to applaud, he began confidently. He spoke about global English, about linguistic structures, about academic classifications. But then, almost out of habit, he repeated the same line he had said months earlier in Geneva. Of course, in some countries, like the Philippines, the English spoken is not quite real English. It is functional, yes, but not reflective of the standard we expect at Harvard. Silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Not anger, not outrage. Something deeper, disappointment. A woman raised her hand, a public school teacher. Her voice calm but unshakably firm. "I teach children who live in homes without electricity or running water. But in my classroom, they write essays in English. They debate in English, they dream in English. You say our English is not real, but to them it is the key to the world." Her eyes shimmered not with tears but conviction. The hall erupted in applause. Before he could respond, a young university student stood. "Professor, if real English means the ability to express ideas, inspire people, and shape futures, then I believe English is more alive here than in the places you come from." More applause. More truth. He felt his face grow warm. His notes suddenly felt useless. For the first time in decades, his own lecture felt ridiculous. He placed the papers down and spoke words he had never spoken publicly. "I came here believing I was the one meant to teach. But perhaps I am the one who needs to learn." The room fell silent again, but this time with respect. He had cracked open the door. But what happened next would tear it off its hinges completely. The next day he was taken to a public high school. Simple building, chipped paint, crowded rooms but buzzing with life. Students greeted him with the kind of joy reserved for people they admired, even if he didn't feel deserving of it anymore. They performed for him. A boy recited Shakespeare with breathtaking skill. A group debated political issues with articulateness he would expect only from graduate students. A girl gave a speech on climate change in crisp, powerful English. He sat frozen. This wasn't imitation. This wasn't mimicry. This was ownership. Filipino English, alive, expressive, deeply rooted in culture. Then came the final blow. A 12-year-old girl stepped forward with a worn notebook. Her voice was soft but steady. She read her essay titled, "My Voice Matters." She wrote about her father working overseas, her mother working nights, her dream of becoming a lawyer. And then she said, When people say Filipinos don't speak real English, I want to grow up and speak for my people. Then she looked directly at him, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a gentle plea. Please don't say our English is not real. It is the only voice many of us have. And in that moment, everything inside him broke. Decades of ego shattered. He removed his glasses, wiped his eyes, and felt something he had not felt since he was a young scholar. The humility of being wrong. Painfully wrong. By the time he walked onto the stage the next day for his closing lecture, he knew what he needed to say. He stood before the audience, hundreds of Filipinos waiting, watching. He cleared his throat. I came here believing the Philippines spoke a version of English. But what I found is a nation that speaks English with clarity, depth, emotion, and authenticity that many native English-speaking countries have begun to lose. He paused, voice trembling. Filipino English is not an imitation. It is not a lesser form. It is one of the most dynamic, expressive, and powerful Englishes spoken in the world. The audience was silent. Then applause exploded, echoing through the hall. He looked out at them, humbled. I apologize, he said softly. And I thank you for teaching me what I should have known all along. English is not owned by one country, not defined by one accent, not reserved for one culture. Language belongs to those who use it with purpose, with passion, with hope. And in the Philippines, English is not just spoken. It is lived, it is carried. It is transformed, it is real. More real than the professor had ever understood. Until the truth stared him directly in the eyes.